Ladies and gentlemen, we have popcorn. And the video you have been begging for. Tonight, we are doing a popcorn review of Aliens and the Lost Ark from the History Channel on this episode of Ancient Egypt and the Bible. Okay, today we are taking an episode from Ancient Aliens, a television series that was broadcast on the History Channel. And the episode we have chosen for this popcorn review comes from Season 6, and it is called Aliens and the Lost Ark. Now, because of the format of this particular series, we're not going to go into the credentials of every one of the speakers. However, almost all of them tend to be supporters of the views of Ancient Aliens, and they are proponents of the theory. Now, as a historian and as somebody who occasionally teaches at a university Egyptian history, I get a lot from my students that, well, you know, what's there to the history of ancient Egypt? Pyramids and aliens. So, even though this is not serious history, it does have an impact upon what people think about history. So, with that said, we are going to give the ideas of this video all the respect they are due. And with that said, let's begin our popcorn review of Aliens and the Lost Ark from History Channel. Okay, you find holes everywhere in paving stones all over Egypt. At any archaeological site, you'll find this. You don't know who did the holes, when they did the holes, what the purpose of the holes were. It's possible it could have been for the tabernacle. It could have been possibly for something else. You know, maybe a satellite tent even. You know, you just don't know. You know, we find post holes at Giza. We find them at Karnak and Luxor. They're found at every site. This is why they're mundane discoveries. Because unless the context is very localized, it's impossible to say why holes were made. They're just a hole without a context. This is more brilliant stuff from ABR that's just sort of feeding into this ancient alien stuff. You know, good going, ABR. You've done it again. I wouldn't say it's unexplored. I think it's more along the lines that it has been explored badly. Scholars don't typically go into explore, say, the Ark of the Covenant from an academic level because it has become sort of one of those topics that it's tainted. It's a tainted topic. It's been tainted by so much bad literature that it's very, very difficult for scholars to do this in a credible manner. I approached the topic in my most recent book, The Ark of the Covenant in its Egyptian Context, An Illustrated Journey, from a scholarly point of view. But I do so in a way that sort of defies the taint done by stuff like Ancient Aliens here. So that's why scholars don't explore the topic, but that doesn't mean the topic hasn't been explored already. Graham Hancock, you took yourself out of mainstream journalism. You know, you found it was just more profitable to make books about conspiracy theories, essentially. Not exactly a dumb move, but You had to forego any credibility as a mainstream journalist at that point. Great movie. Not the most faithful recreation of the Ark, but great movie. The Ark of the Covenant, very, very simply, is the Jewish or the early Israelite recreation of a sacred bark. This is a piece of religious processional furniture that had a compartment to hold the 10 Commandments, and then above it, a mercy seat that had 2 winged cherubims that were used to transport the localized presence of the deity, of God. That's what it was in a nutshell. Oh, no. Why when shows like this do their thing, they always sort of pick the fundamentalist date here? I mean, this is 15th century BC, really? You know, the 15th century is so easy to defeat as far as evidence goes. You know, there's 2 competing dates for the Exodus, 2 major competing theories. The 15th century and the 13th century. The 15th century view just defies the evidence. It's so easy to defeat. But this is where people sort of gravitate, is to that fundamentalist reading of the text here. Man, wish they'd stop that. Irradiated? I wouldn't say the tablets were irradiated. Nothing in the Bible says the tablets were irradiated. You know, this is fantasy. This is fantasy. This is eisegesis. This is reading into the biblical text what you want to get out of it. It's reading it to confirm your bias. It's not actually in the text. There's nothing in the text that says that the tablets themselves were irradiated or gave off radiation. That's actually true. The Sinai covenant was a suzerain treaty between God and the people of Israel. So that is absolutely true, that it is a treaty. You keep these commandments, I'll be your God, I'll protect you from and bless you. Disobey the law, there will be curses and bad things will happen to you. So yes, it's a suzerain treaty. It's about 45, 47 inches by 27 by 27. I have to hand it to the visual effects unit at the History Channel here, Ancient Aliens production team. That is actually a pretty good recreation of the Ark of the Covenant. It's one of the better ones I've seen. It gets the pole rings in the right places. The cherubim are facing the right direction. They are humaniform. They are anthropoid. That's also correct. The only sort of caveat here is I would say that the cherubim here need to be more styled after what would have been found in Egyptian iconography. We do find from Israelite art and iconography that their iconography was very much influenced from iconography found in Egypt. And we find this, for example, on the ring seal of Hezekiah, which has the solar disk with wings plus 2 ankhs, essentially Egyptian crosses. So we do know that Israelite religious furniture iconography was deeply, deeply influenced by Egypt. And the Israelites just coming out of Egypt would have carried over that influence. So in this particular illustration, those cherubim need to look more like Egyptian winged goddesses. Oh, that's easy. Because God is is not like other gods of the ancient Near East. Yahweh does not want sloppy worship. If you worship God, you've got to do it God's way. And the whole sacrificial temple tabernacle system is precisely to get people to worship God God's way. So that's why the measurements and the characteristics of things such as the tabernacle and the ark are so precise. They are intended to instill in the Israelites this way of thinking of saying, okay, we can't just go willy-nilly off and do our own thing. We can't just create our own arks. We can't just go up onto the hilltops and worship God in it privately. We've got to do it the way God prescribes. So that's why all of this is so precise. He doesn't. God does not require a physical throne on earth. What this is God condescending to man. In the late Bronze Age, it was believed that a god could only be in one place at one time. Essentially, the idea is called localism, that God could only be one place at a time. And this was true across ancient Near Eastern cultures, this belief. So in order for a people to house their god, they needed to create a throne for him to come, to sit, have holy space, and to have relationship. So what God is doing is instructing them to make something they are familiar with, which is a kind of sacred bark in the shape of this ark, so that God could condescend to their beliefs so that he can have relationship with mankind. So he doesn't need a throne. He is just playing off of late Bronze Age Israelite beliefs to have relationship. Because he had just encountered God, and an encounter with face-to-face encounter with God is going to leave its effects. Oh, of course. Can't be God. It's got to be E.T. with a flying saucer. Of course. Absolutely. Uh-huh. Okay. They weren't priests. Priests weren't actually permitted to carry the Ark of the Covenant. They were Levites, but while all priests were Levites, not all Levites were priests. So the people who carried the Ark were Levites of the descended from the family of Kohath, who was one of the sons of Levi. These were the people that were allowed. Now, when it came to tabernacle service, each family of the Levites had different roles. One of the families, their job was to dismantle the tent and to reassemble it. The Kohathites had the job of carrying it from place to place, but they weren't priests. Priests actually did temple service, and they were not permitted to carry the Ark of the Covenant. Only descendants of the clan of Kohath were allowed to do this. Transport of the Ark on an ox cart was not permitted. It had to be carried by the poles. So that's a no-no. There's actually no prohibition to looking at the Ark. And there's actually no punishment to looking at the Ark. This is reading beyond the text. It was forbidden to touch. It wasn't any sort of religious defilement simply to look at it. Okay, now this is sloppy reading of the text. What the text actually says is that the piece of Aaron's rod and the jar of manna were placed before the Ark of the Covenant, essentially in front of it. It wasn't placed inside the Ark. The Ark, the only thing that we know was in the Ark were the 2 tablets of the law. That's the only thing we're absolutely sure was inside of it. These other items, including a copy of the Book of Moses, which he wrote out, was accompanied the Ark, alongside the Ark, but were not necessarily inside the Ark. So this is just sloppy reading of the text. A toolkit? No, it's not a toolkit. The Ark of the Covenant is the best described object of ancient times. We have more writing about the Ark of the Covenant than any other object from the ancient world. We have two accounts of it, one of its plans and one of it being made, plus we have other references to it, so it is the best documented object of ancient times. Knowing how it was made, knowing that it was an acacia box with gold inside and out, there is nothing in the plans or its construction that suggests it was a toolkit. Okay, this is the Anachronistic Fallacy. And the Anachronistic Fallacy is when you say, well, what we have today must have always been. Okay. So what he's doing here is he's saying that because Sinai is this terrible, desolate desert today, it must have always been a desolate, terrible desert. Well, the fact is that the Sinai has gone through climate change over time. Historical ecology has shown us that during the Neolithic period, it was actually quite damp. During the Neolithic wet phase, the Sinai had fields, it had forests, it had wild game, and tribes of Semites used to hunt in the Sinai and make their living off of the hunting. Now, by the time of Moses, and after the end of the Neolithic wet period, those forests and fields eventually dried out and became savanna. And that's where what we see during the time of Moses is that essentially the Sinai has become a kind of arid savanna. It's on its way to being a complete desert, but it hadn't quite reached that yet. So during the time of Moses, there were still some pastures, some springs, places to get water, places to still find food. So it isn't completely the nasty arid desert that it is today. So that's the anachronistic fallacy here. And I hear it not only from ancient alien theorists, but I also hear it from skeptics too, who pretty much say the same thing, not knowing that they are actually committing a historical fallacy here. Where is it said that? Who said that? It's not in the Bible. The Bible doesn't say anything about the Ark of the Covenant providing for the Israelites. Nowhere. What? The Manna Machine. The Ark of the Covenant is the Manna Machine. Oh, no, 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 no. Does it make popcorn too? Hey, the Ark of the... Orville Redenbacher would be just driven mad with jealousy, you know. Why make popcorn? Why make it sell popcorn when you just can have the Ark of the Covenant make popcorn? Or manna. Flip the switch, you got manna. Flip the switch the other way, you can have popcorn. Wonderful thing, the Ark of the Covenant. Wow. Combining food and atomic energy is not a great idea. What could possibly go wrong there? I think we call this contaminated food at this point. Ooh. Eee. That can't end well. I'm surprised the whole congregation of Israel wasn't glowing. Oh, okay. It's such a mystery it could create food. Well, if it's such a mystery, how do you know it could create food? It's like, well, my trunk is such a mystery. It could contain gold. The fact it contains just moldy clothing is a whole different matter. The latter doesn't follow from the former. Just because something is a mystery doesn't mean it has necessarily certain qualities. From the late Bronze Age. Super duper energy creating super machine from the late Bronze Age. Yeah. We're gonna give this massively powerful nuclear device that can create food and give it to primitive Bronze Age people. Oh yeah, that's just gonna end so well. Okay, the Kabbalah is a 13th century AD compilation of medieval Jewish mysticism. It's put to pen 1,000 years after the last sighting of the Ark of the Covenant. Yeah, I don't think we can really trust anything from the Zohar here. Just saying. What? Somebody does not know their Hebrew. Ancient of Days is not a mistranslation of the portable one with tanks. The epithet Ancient of Days is found in pagan sources. It is found in pagan sources, but it occurs in the Bible, in the book of Daniel. And the Hebrew text literally reads, "The Old One of Days." There's no way you could get the portable one of tanks out of this. This is just pig ignorance, flaunted as fact. It's crazy talk. It's absolutely bizarre. Yeah, what if? I have no doubt they're reporting on what they're actually seeing. I have no problem with that. What I have a problem with is reading beyond that. And I think that's what we're having a problem with here with these ancient alien theorists, for lack of a better word, is they're not reading the text and what the people are reporting they're seeing. They're reading into the text to get their own biases out of the text. So they're going beyond what these ancient people are seeing and recording. Oh, of course, because Bronze Age people know how to use ancient alien technology. It just comes second nature to them. Yeah, this is called a wind set down. And it is a recorded phenomenon in the ancient Near East. Okay, that happened from time to time in the ancient Near East. So wind set downs are actually just a natural phenomena. If it's a natural phenomena, why do you need the Ark of the Covenant to do this? Well, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. And there's nothing in the biblical text that, say, ascribes to the Ark of the Covenant the ability to do something like a wind set down. That's not Jericho. Definitely not Jericho. Jericho looks nothing like that. Somebody needs to get their files sorted out. They had heard rumors of the great and awesome God, and they were afraid of the people of Israel. That's in the text. They weren't afraid of the ark. The people who lived in Canaan were afraid of this mass of people who are coming through to take over. They weren't afraid of the box. They were afraid of the people and their God who had secured victories for them. That's what they were afraid of. No. Okay, let's talk a bit about Jericho here. First of all, the walls of Jericho weren't made of stone. They weren't made of stone. They were made of mud brick. The walls during the Late Bronze Age were a casemate mud brick design. Second of all, they're not creating a sonic boom here. I mean, I think much more likely what happened was mud brick casemate walls are not very good walls. They're not really good defensive barriers. They're easy to break, they're easy to tear down, and Jericho has a lot of wind erosion. A lot of wind erosion. So that would just wreak havoc on a mud brick casemate wall. So I think it wasn't so much that the walls were blown down by a sonic boom, but just because the integrity of the wall had been compromised over time, and the Israelites just happened to be there when the structural integrity of the casemate design finally failed. Okay, let's talk about this could-be thing. Because I think it's kind of important to really discuss this. This is a logical fallacy where they talk about, say, could it be that? When you hear those words, could it be that? This is what's called the least likely hypothesis fallacy. And this is the fallacy where, when given a set of data, you jump to the least likely hypothesis. And here on the channel, Ancient Egypt and the Bible, we take logical fallacy and this sort of analysis very, very seriously. Which is why we actually have a special guest today. Hello! This is my friend, Mr. Empty Conjecture. Hi there! What is Mr. Empty Conjecture? He is from the family of informal logical fallacies. And his particular specialty is the least likely hypothesis. Could be! And whenever you talk to somebody who wants to discuss the least likely hypothesis, the question that keeps coming up is, could be. So, Mr. Empty Conjecture here is basically our physical representation of all of those empty conjectures that we see from time to time. So, we take the empty conjecture or least likely hypothesis fallacy seriously on this channel. So, thank you for joining us, Mr. Empty Conjecture. But I think it's time to go now, okay? Could be! Okay, what happened during that event was that a mob of Israelites went to Shiloh and essentially pushed the priests aside, took the ark without its coverings and went out to fight the battle. It wasn't that God wasn't instructing them to fight the battle. And it wasn't that the Ark of the Covenant couldn't be brought out into battle. It had been done that way before. But it had to be done a certain way. It had to be done with respect for the temple rituals. Now, at the same time, too, the Ark was never supposed to be set up in one place. It was never supposed to reside just in Shiloh. It was supposed to travel amongst the tribes. That's why it was in a portable tent, so it could move between tribes. But eventually it did settle in Shiloh, where it sort of stayed for hundreds of years. The fact is that the offense here was treating the Ark in an improper manner, which is why they lost the battle. Well, that's okay, because in modern times we have no concept of divine judgment either. Yeah, if this thing pour out radiation, why didn't it contaminate the priests who served in say, the temple and the tabernacle? It just doesn't make a whit of sense at all. This is just subverting the narrative for a particular end. Okay, now, even though placing the ark on a ox cart was forbidden, the Philistines weren't punished for this because essentially they didn't know better. But the Philistines do something that's also very interesting too, is the two cows that pulled the cart were milk cows that had never pulled a load. One of the reasons why ox carts were forbidden to carry the ark was because they were considered ritually unclean. They could have carried they pulled a load and could have in potential had been used at one point to pull a cart with a corpse on it or a body. That would have made any oxen potentially unclean for ritual use. So while oxen were clean animals to eat, they weren't clean for the sake of holy or ritual items. But the Philistines here don't do that. They don't use oxen. They use milk cows that have never pulled a load, thus showing more deference and respect to the Ark of the Covenant than what's going to end up happening at, say, Beit Shemesh. Okay, the men at Beit Shemesh didn't just look at the Ark. They popped the top off and looked inside. That's different. Yes, the Philistines did the same thing. And they were punished, but not as severely. And the reason they're not as severely punished is because the Philistines didn't know better. The men at Beit Shemesh were good, observant Israelites. They should have known better. And because they should have known better, they're given more punishment because more was expected of them. Yeah, that's a misreading. I mean, Indiana Jones loved the film, but they misread that too. Again, it's not looking at the Ark, it's looking inside the Ark. No, it doesn't quite say that. They were struck dead, though. But they were struck dead for bringing two reasons. One was because they brought strange fire, and they removed the poles from the Ark and put them elsewhere. The poles of the Ark were not supposed to leave the pole rings. So that's why they're punished. Because they weren't doing it God's way. They were doing it their own way. They knew better, and they were messing around with things they shouldn't have been messing around with. That's why. They weren't doing it God's way. And they were doing it flagrantly and without regard for the consequences. No, Because it would kill, if it contained a nuclear device, it would kill basically the people who are carrying it. There's not enough shielding on, say, the gold used on the Ark of the Covenant to prevent contamination. Just simply not enough. So, no, it's not a device. The sons of Aaron were not permitted to carry the Ark. That was the Kohathites. Those are not sons of Aaron. So, no. No, he's wrong. Okay. The breastplate was probably only yay big. It's not a huge item here. And it only covered the chest. It didn't cover anything else. The whole idea of priests dying and have to have a rope tied around their leg to pull them out. There is actually no real evidence that ever occurred. So, that's sort of rabbinic myth that sort of is told later on, but, there's no evidence that actually occurred. Okay. It's called in English the Mercy Seat. That's not the name in Hebrew. The name in Hebrew is Kaparet. The problem here is that in our English Bibles, the translation mercy seat comes from the German Gnadenstuhl. Basically, mercy seat. It was a translation that was done by Wycliffe and then later also adopted by Luther to not just emphasize that this was a lid, but a throne. So this translation is a theological construct as much as it is, say, a communicating a translation. Now, Kaparet, if you go back, it comes from a word that means to cover or atone in the original Hebrew. The verbal lexeme has more of the idea of to smear. But there's also some related Egyptian cognate to this word too, which is kapa, which is the lid that one places on a coffin. So ultimately, the translation here means a lid. That is it's just that simple. It's just a lid. Yeah, it's anticlimactic, but sometimes those are the way translations are. So the best translation for this is a lid. But that's where we get the term mercy seat from. Is through a translation of a translation of a translation, essentially. Could be. Okay. The Ark of the Covenant is not a capacitor. Now, one of the things I do as a hobby is I do electronics. I was a computer systems engineer for 20 years. I do have a reasonably good handle on electronics. The way a capacitor works is you have two metallic plates separated by an insulator. And those two plates store electric charge. essentially an energy differential. And then they release that energy differential when the two plates form a circuit. The Ark of the Covenant is not made of two plates. It's covered with gold inside and out. It's technically only one plate. You can't have a single plate capacitor. It just isn't happening. As soon as the gold of the lid touches the plating inside and out on the box unit of the Ark, any potential for static there is discharged. So, no, this is not in any way a capacitor. It cannot be a capacitor by definition. One small problem here is examples of sacred books that we have from the ancient Near East, sacred furniture, is that the lip was also covered in gold. So the gold foil extends not just on the outside and not just the inside, but it covers the lip as well. So it goes around and touches the inside. We have lots of examples of this from the Tomb of King Tut. So, no. No. And even so, it'd be a pretty poor capacitor, in all honesty. Certainly not enough to drive a mana machine. Yeah, we don't get any vibrating stones off of other people's jewelry. I mean, I was a jeweler for many years. I have never seen any piece of jewelry start vibrating. This is just fantasy. Oh, they light up too. Oh yeah, okay. Yes, God is communicating with a code. He's using the cultural context of the late Bronze Age. Concepts such as ritual, religion, ideas about God. He's using ideas of iconography to communicate things about, say, the divine. Cherubim, seraphim, to connote ideas of angels and heavenly beings. Yes, God is using a code. He is using their cultural context to communicate them. And I think here is the danger of this ancient aliens narrative. And Michael Heiser has pointed this out too. So I'm not alone in saying this. Michael Heiser has said on one of his podcasts that the danger of the ancient alien stuff is it takes the cultural context of the ancient Near East and completely subverts its message, changes the message from one where it becomes of using the cultural context for Yahweh worship into this conspiracy of ancient aliens. And I think that is the danger here, is that it totally undermines and guts the passage to become this eisegetical fantasy. It doesn't quite vanish. It does. It doesn't quite vanish. It's just no longer talked about anymore. Just because something isn't discussed doesn't mean it disappeared physically. This is an absence of evidence argument. It's terrible reasoning. Absolutely terrible reasoning. It's basically saying, well, we have no more evidence of it, so therefore this must have happened. Atrocious reasoning. Absolutely atrocious reason. But absence of evidence arguments are used all the time in our culture. They're even used by historians, and I think it's really shameful that happens. But this is an absence of evidence argument. More likely, it was just no longer really relevant. Oh. Oh, no. Oh. Oh, no. No serious scholar, even in Japan, believes this. This is not something that's purported by scholars. Now, we have to understand that when the Jesuit missionaries came to Japan, they were only able to give more or less a kind of an incomplete understanding of Christianity before they were ejected, essentially executed, and Christianity was outlawed in Japan. But people did carry on Christian-like traditions after Christianity was outlawed in Japan. You do get some strange beliefs that came out of the original seeds that the Jesuits planted in Japan. You do have one shrine in Japan where it's believed that Jesus Christ came and was buried at. So you do get a lot of stuff like this in Japan. Now, when Christianity was made legal again in Japan after the Meiji Restoration, a lot of missionaries started coming back to Japan and had to have a dialogue with these native practicers of really, really aberrant Christianity to try to sort of get them back on the right track. And it's been a very difficult process because there are many holdouts to this still in Japan. Like, for example, especially in Osaka, you find this. Okay. The lost tribes of Israel aren't lost. We know exactly what happened to them. The lost tribes, which is basically the 10 tribes of northern Israel, what happened to them? We have to understand that okay, they're conquered by the Assyrians in 722. And then they are deported all across the Assyrian Empire. And the names of these Israelites are recorded in Assyrian documents. Now, we have to understand that while the lost tribes are deported across Assyria, the Assyrian Empire, the Ark of the Covenant is still in Jerusalem. It's still in Jerusalem because the Judahite kingdom it has its integrity. It's still in operation for until it's conquered by the Babylonians. So the lost tribes never had the Ark to take it to Japan. So again, this is a muddling of history. This is a muddling of history to confirm a bias. Could be. That's a theory that's found in the Talmud, but it's also one of two theories found in the Talmud. One theory is that the Ark of the Covenant was buried underneath the Temple Mount. The other is that it was melted for its gold content by Nebuchadnezzar. Which one do you pick? I know which one I side with, and it's not the one under the Temple Mount. I think it's a lot more likely that the Ark of the Covenant was melted down for its gold content. Oh yeah, let's blame the Knights Templar for everything. No, I don't think they found the Ark. I think if the Knights Templar found the Ark of the Covenant, they would really emphasize that, it would sort of cement their claim that God meant them to occupy Jerusalem. So I can't see the Knights Templar, finding it and then not making a big issue of it. Okay. There is so many crazy theories about where the Ark could be that it isn't even funny. There are people who say it's in Ethiopia. There's people who say it's under the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. There are people who say it's buried in Jeremiah's tomb, near Jerusalem. There are people who say that it was in France. There are people who say it's in England, in Ireland, at the site of Tara. There's even some people who even suggest that it was on Oak Island in North America. So there's just so many strange theories about what happened to the Ark of the Covenant. It just sort of defies credulity. If the Nazis found wind of treasure anywhere, they just died, because they were greedy. They weren't going to pass up an opportunity to let treasure pass through their fingers. What's causing that is vitamin A deficiency. It's very common across in areas where there's a lot of barley eaten. So that's a vitamin A deficiency. All right, let's talk about the Ark at St. Mary's. During World War II, Ethiopia had been conquered by the Italians, by the fascist Italians under Mussolini. And when Italy was defeated, or surrendered, I should say, they surrendered, British forces occupied Ethiopia. During that time, a young British officer actually entered into that St. Mary's and actually had a look at what that was passing for the Ark. That young soldier at the time eventually became a professor of ancient Near Eastern studies at the University of College London. And having seen the Ark, he said that this was nothing more than a medieval replica. The dimensions are all wrong. The construction is all wrong. It's not the original Ark of the Covenant, but it's a medieval replica. So, the only person from the West who has actually been inside there and seen it, and is qualified to comment on it, basically says it's not the Ark of the Covenant. And I think that's the best we have for that, so I think we can completely disqualify that. Now, we could disqualify it for another reason too, which is every church in Ethiopia, in this Ethiopian branch of Christianity, has as its center something they call the Ark. And over history, several of these arks have been taken and examined by archaeologists. I think in 2008, Aberdeen University returned one of these arks to a church in Ethiopia. So from time to time, there are still these arks that come into the media. But what's odd too is the word for these arks is called a teba, and that is a Egyptian word for a chest. But it isn't an ark, because an ark in Hebrew is an aron. They're different. So the idea that the Ethiopians got the Ark from Israel comes through a tale called the Kebra Nagast, which is a sort of fictionalized account. It's very anachronistic. It has characters through all through history, mishmashed, and it is an attempt to prop up the failing monarchy of Aksum in the 13th century AD. So it's a late account, it's not a credible account, and I don't think that what's contained in St. Mary's of Zion is the real Ark of the Covenant. So I think it's a self-discrediting account. Could be. Why would they confirm or deny that it's the Ark of the Covenant? What advantage does that bring to the church? If they submit it to tests and it turns out not to be the Ark of the Covenant, they've lost respect in the eyes of their followers. If they confirm that it is the Ark of the Covenant, they also haven't gained anything because they're really only ministering to their local population. It's of no benefit to them one way or the other to confirm or deny it. So for them, it's not. And even then, if it turns out to be the Ark of the Covenant, now it becomes a security concern. So there's no, at that point, there's just no benefit in them doing this. No, this is not two arks. The Ark at the beginning is originally called the Ark of the Testimony. And then later on, the name changes to the Ark of the Covenant. This is not two different arks. Bezalel made the Ark. What we have here is a change in the position of the covenant. The Ark of the Testimony is the Ark before the covenant is ratified. The word in Hebrew is edut. And edut is sort of it's a negotiation. Essentially, when you have, say, a contract between two parties, the two parties conspire. Edut can also not only mean a testimony, it can also mean to conspire. So when two parties come together to negotiate an agreement, they are conspiring with each other to come up with an agreement. When that agreement is ratified, signed, and sealed, it then becomes a covenant, a treaty. So what we have here is actually the name of the Ark of the Covenant changing from Ark of the Conspiracy before to Ark of the Covenant once the covenant is ratified. That's all this is. It's a name change. It's not actually two different arks. Yeah, Yehuda Getz is a big proponent of that the Ark is under the Temple Mount. And there's even been some claims that, he saw it himself, although there's been absolutely no proof of such claims. These claims are no better than Ron Wyatt's claim of having gone under the Temple Mount and seeing the Ark with his own eyes. This is just, again, sterile conjecture. There's just these stories have no evidence. And for any of these sightings, we do need evidence. But any historian would know that. Of course, UFOs. Okay. Yeah. Oh boy. This isn't serious history. Not in the slightest. Yeah, UFO sightings have also been found at, say, Chicago's O'Hare Airport. Is the Ark of the Covenant there also? The Ark of the Covenant is a UFO magnet. No. That's the great thing about speculation. You don't need evidence for speculation. But you do need evidence for history. And every historian knows this. You can speculate absolutely anything without evidence. That's eisegesis. Essentially reading into the text. There is nothing saying that that is applying to, a real earthquake, or that its fulfillment is found in Ancient Aliens. That's total eisegesis. This is no better than newspaper prophecy preaching. It's no better. Oh, of course, because the Ark can levitate too. Why does it have poles? Why does it need to carry it if it can be levitated? It's got the power to levitate itself. Why do you need poles? Just push it along with wind. Tie a string onto it and pull it wherever you go. They did have drawcord technology in the late Bronze Age. We have pictures of sacred barks being pulled by a drawcord. Why can't we, if the Ark of the Covenant floats, why can't they just pull it on him? He'd be less risky than carrying poles. Tie two cords to the pole rings and you're done. You're safe. Heck, you can pull it from 20 feet away. Get away from all that nasty radiation. Long rope. The ideal method of transporting the Ark as it levitates. Of course. Because the Ark of the Covenant not only summons aliens, it summons the Messiah too. Oh dear. Oh my gosh. If the Ark could be found, what we would find is a acacia wood box covered in gold. Yeah, exploiting the technology of the late Bronze Age is what we're all after. I think we're a little past that at this point. Just a thought. It's all the above. It's a bomb. It's a food source. It's protection. It shows the way. It levitates. It discharges static electricity. It gives you a sonic boom. It gives you a nuclear boom. And that's why we're in the territory of crazy speculation. Okay, so that ends our popcorn review of Aliens and the Lost Ark from Season 6 of Ancient Aliens from the History Channel. Now, one of the things that we find when we do these popcorn reviews is that certain fallacies seem to be emphasized more than others. In this particular video, what we see really emphasized is the least likely hypothesis fallacy, also called empty speculation. And it's a sort of kind of intellectual laziness. It's basically taking the data and then jumping to the least likely hypothesis. But I think this is unnecessary when we talk about something as interesting as the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant has a backstory that's incredibly interesting. It's based upon thousands of years of ritual processional furniture. It's based upon a metaphysics that believed that demons wandered the land, that gods were in the temples, that there was this all this sort of metaphysics and mythology behind the Ark of the Covenant that makes it really, really interesting. And then when you start to study the Ark of the Covenant, what you actually discover is that God is taking these ancient concepts of religion and flipping them on their head to create new religious understanding. It's really, really interesting, and it doesn't need to be embellished. The Word of God here is sufficient to give us really solid understanding of what the Ark was and why it was there and how it was used. And we don't need to resort to fantasy to do it. Truth is more interesting here than fiction. So anyway, I want to thank everyone for watching this popcorn review. I hope you learned something and found it interesting, and I'll see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible.